Well, the Cleddau River, or to be more precise at this point, the Cleddau River, the two Cleddau's, has always been a major highway throughout central Pembrokeshire. Before roads were as they are today, it was easier to get from one place to another along the river by boat. And consequently, ferry crossings were very common. And where we are now, at Langham Ferry, there was a ferry crossing over to Coed Canlas on the other side of the river. And that was used fairly frequently, and we can date that right the way back to the 1850s at least, where we have a William Pickens, who was a ferryman, who lived in a cottage alongside the river. The cottage is derelict now, but he used to ferry people back and forth. And I think the last one that we have is a person called William Llewellyn, for some reason called Darky Llewellyn, and he would have been here in the 1930s and 40s, and that's probably the last time that we have a ferry that goes across. There are lots of other ferries which cross the river. We can go up to Land Shipping Ferry, where there would have been a ferry which rode across to Picton Point. I'm sure there was probably one between Hook and Bolston, although I haven't got anything definite on that. And as you go further downstream, there was a ferry service between Loreni Ferry and Roos Ferry, and similarly between Loreni and Jenkins Point, which would have been Cosheston. And then again, going further down, we would have had Burton Ferry, and Burton Ferry across to Pembroke Ferry, where the pub is in Pembroke Ferry. We still have the names. If you go across to Hazel Beach, we have the ferry inn at Hazel Beach. So one presumes that there would have been a ferry service from Hazel Beach across to Pembroke Dock. Of course, the services across to Pembroke Dock were so important because up until 1926, when the dockyard closed, that would have been a thriving community and would have been a source of, would have had the weekly market there. And so people used the river to go to market rather than the roads possibly to go to Haverfordwest. So if you were located on the river, Pembroke Dock became your marketplace. There was a steamer which used to come every Monday, I was told, and would come up and pick people up all along the river at the various village communities and then take them down to Pembroke Dock to do their shopping and then bring them back again at the end of the day. So Pembroke Dock was the hub. But of course the dockyard in Pembroke Dock was also very important and employed large numbers of people. I think it's 5,000 people at one time. And many of the villagers, particularly in Langham and Burton, they worked in the dockyard. So to get across to the dockyard at 6 a.m, they would have to leave their homes and cycle down to Burton Ferry and catch the ferry boat across to Pembroke Dockyard. Langham is renowned for its fishing boats. They're about 14 foot long, some a little shorter. No two are exactly the same because they were designed and built by their owners. They were tarred completely in order to make them waterproof. The seams were caulked with oakum and then pitch poured into that, and then the boats were tarred. The boats were made of a variety of timber wherever they could get it, but I heard a very interesting story of people working in the dockyard, many of the men from the village working in the dockyard, and of course security on a royal dockyard was very, very tight with armed guards on the gates. But it wasn't unknown for a baulk of timber to suddenly find its way into the water where the tide carried it upstream, and like all flotsam, it may have been picked up later and used to good effect in building the boats. Langham's always been renowned for its fisherwomen, and in the 19th century, oyster fishing particularly was at its peak. And prawns were harvested from the river, oysters, cockles, mussels, and these would have been sold far afield. In fact, some of the Langham fisherwomen went as far as Tenby and even Carmarthen. There's a famous Frith photograph of Tenby fisherwomen on the North Beach in Tenby, but actually there are 4 Langham fisherwomen. So the Langham fisherwomen would take their wares by donkey and cart and travel down to Burton Ferry, leave their donkeys in a field to graze for the day, park their carts, and then with large baskets called panniers, which they wore on their back with large leather straps coming down over the front, and hand baskets, huge hand baskets. They would go across on the ferry over to Pembroke Dock to sell their wares. And one enterprising lady actually had the contract with the defensible barracks up on the hill in Pembroke Dock, and she would take her wares up to the soldiers there, first of all going to the officers' quarters, then to the sergeant's mess, and then to the others. And if there were any left, I presume they bought them as well. So that was quite a very good contract. But others would have sold them around door to door around the town, and actually going to places like Tenby. Indeed, Frith painted a famous Langham fisherwoman selling oysters at a doorstep. And so that's one. I'm not sure where that is particular painting is held, but it's one of the iconic paintings of a Langham fisherwoman. There's another story which, whether it's true, but I have no reason to doubt that it was, that coming back from a fishing expedition downriver, they came up past Nayland, and the royal yacht Victoria and Albert was moored off Pembroke Dock, and the fishing boat was hailed to come alongside, and the officers on board asked what they had in the boat, and they said, well, we have oysters and we have prawns, and actually bought their wares. We don't know whether Queen Victoria actually had any of the oysters or not, but certainly it is said that they were sold to the crew on the Royal Yacht Victoria. If you look at a marine chart, you'll see that some places on the river are named Castle Reach, Beggar's Reach, Langham Pool, but the fishermen would have had a name for every little promontory, every rock, every inlet, all the way along the river. And some of them make really interesting reading. For example, I've got some here: Salt Pool, The Chemicals, Oil Bay, Loreni Cockshut, The Withies, Dun Cow, Red Slop, Sanders Rock, Cow Beach. Always pronounced Cow Beach, but actually spelled Cow Beach. So the local accent would have, mutated it to Cow Beach. The Ship's Stern, The Rain of Rocks, The Ladies' Table. These are all places all the way along the river, and I think I've recorded 97 different ones of these that are not shown on the chart, but are the local fishing names. So it makes fascinating study, looking at, in times gone by, fishermen would have been able to identify an exact spot by the name that it was given. Like any waterside community, especially those involved in fishing, there's always a history of tragedy. Langham's no different. And in the last 100 years, two notable incidents have come to mind. Firstly, is the tale of Sam and Mary John. They were an elderly couple, Sam 72 and Mary 68. And on June the 28th in 1930, they set off downriver to fish for the day. But when they didn't return, people became very anxious and wondered what had happened to them. And so a search party was sent out, but again, there was no sign of them. But eventually they found a boat floating freely on the Carew River. But the occupants were gone. They found Mary's clogs and her hat and coat in the boat, but no sign of the occupants at all. But the next day, they discovered Sam's body actually engulfed in mud on the river, and Mary's body was found a mile or so away as well. It's not known exactly what happened, but they think, putting all the pieces together, that probably the boat had grounded and Sam had got out of the boat in order to push it off and become stuck in the mud. And Mary went to try and help him, and the boat drifted off, and they were both marooned. Sam had become so stuck into the mud that when the tide came in, he had no way of extricating himself, and he drowned. But Mary, would seem, was carried away by the tide and ended up some way away. It's one of those things that people remember in the village, and the tale is told even today. But even closer to home, in a sense, a more recent event happened in 1970, April the 1st, 1970. The fleet of fishing boats had gone downriver to fish in Castle Reach at Gully Draft, a particular area there, for herring. And they shot their nets and everything else. and one of the boats with David Davis and Ian Jacob on board had, they caught so many herring, they caught 70 stone of herring. And when all those went onto the boat was so laden that there was only about 6 inches of freeboard alongside. So Ian transferred to another boat, which also then caught a large amount of herring. And as they made their way back up, David's father, who was worried by the delay, came down to meet them, and he got into the boat with David as well. And as they made their way up, with so little showing above the waterline, all went well until the motor broke down. They were taken in tow by one of the other boats, and as they rounded from Beggar's Reach into the Langham Reach, the water became choppier because the wind presumably was blowing northerly, and the boat got swamped, and it went down with David and his father on board. The people in the other boat, Don Rees and Ian, who had transferred, circled round to help them, and as the people in the water grabbed their boat, it too went down, and so 4 people ended up in the water. 3 of them managed to get ashore, 1 of them went missing, and it wasn't until the next day that they were able to recover him, and that was Edwin Davis. Great tragedy, had quite a sobering effect on everyone who went fishing.